Hello and welcome back to the Bio 122 video lectures. This is video 27 on osmoregulation out of chapter 41 of the textbook. So the definition of osmoregulation is based on osmosis, which you learned about in your first bio class as being the movement of water to an area of higher concentration of a solute, something that's dissolved in the water but can't move through a membrane. So water will tend to move towards the area of a higher salt concentration. So when we're talking about osmosis, we're really talking about the salts, sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, and those are also known as electrolytes, but we have several types of ions, which would be the electrolytes, but also non-electrolytes. So in addition to sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, but also there's anions, bicarbonates, phosphate, but also chloride and carbonate can contribute. However, the biggest factors in regulating the movement of water throughout across cell membranes is primarily going to be the role of sodium. So we often refer to osmosis as being water follows the sodium is kind of a quick um, a quick mnemonic that we use for that. But it is critical because we have to make sure that the amount of water inside a cell stays constant for its cell's own homeostasis. And a isotonic solution means that there's the same osmotic pressure inside and outside so that the body fluids will be isotonic with the systolic fluids, the cytosol. And in that case, water is coming into the cell at the same rate that it's leaving, and the cell is able to maintain its concentration of water. But if a cell is placed into a hypertonic solution, meaning that, for instance, there's a lot of salt in the solution, and I'm sure you probably have done this experiment and seen this experiment done in your Bio 1 course and even in high school biology courses, where the water will tend to move out of a cell. And so cells like red blood cells here will shrink and be destroyed. It's called crenation. And opposite to that is a hypotonic solution. So if you just put a living cell into just pure water, what will happen is water will flood into the cell because there's a greater concentration of salts inside the cell. And that will actually cause the cell to explode, to lyse. So both conditions are very bad. And so we have to have mechanisms in a animal body in order to make sure that the body fluids stay the correct um, tonicity. Well, one of the issues, and of course, animals first evolved in water in the oceans. And if we look at marine organisms as a model mechanism for osmosis, we find that the vast majority of marine organisms, so about 90% of them, are actually what we refer to as a osmoconformer, meaning that they do keep their internal environment isoosmotic relative to the external environment, meaning the same osmotic pressure, but that means they are restricted to very specific areas in which they live. So they would have to adjust where they're living in the oceans, depending on the current salinity of the oceans. That's opposed to an osmoregulator, where so about 10% of marine organisms, salmon is one of the most familiar ones with that, can actually live in a wide range. And salmon can actually go from salt waters to fresh waters because they have evolved mechanisms that allow them to adapt to a variety of environments. This mechanism they use is osmoregulation. It allows them to alter their urine production to produce a more osmotic or a more hypertonic or a more hypotonic solution, um, with more water or more solutes in order to balance out the body tonicity. So that, of course, comes at a great cost of energy, but they benefit from the ability to live in multiple environments. So here's an example of salmon living in both a freshwater environment and a saltwater environment. This is a diagram from your textbook. But if we look at the situation where a salmon, for instance, is living in a marine environment, they have evolved mechanisms by which they can use the skin, the gills, and the production of urine to help regulate. Because when they're in the marine environment, there is a very high concentration of dissolved salts in the ocean water. And this will tend to promote the loss of water by osmosis, but also the gain of ions because they're drinking water, which has many more ions in it. So what they do in the color coding here is red indicates ion movement and blue indicates water movement. So as water comes in through the gills, they excrete ions, and of course they're going to lose some water there, but they're also going to lose some water through the skin. So this is the consequence of osmosis, and they have to compensate for that somehow. So they're already got the issue with the gills and the skin. So what they can control is their production of urine. And when they are in the marine environment, their urine is extremely concentrated. So it contains a high concentration of sodium, potassium, and chloride. So they can remove that excess um, um, ions from the body, but it's using a minimum amount of water. You have to use some water to produce urine, but they will reduce that amount of water and increase the concentration of ions. Compare that to when the same fish moves to a freshwater environment, because the freshwater environment is going to tend to promote a gain of water. Because remember, water is going to flow towards the area of higher concentration of ions. Freshwater doesn't have as much. The inner body has more. And so it's going to be promoting a gain of water through osmosis. And then ions are going to be lost as they are excreted from the body. So now we have to kind of shift around the production of urine. So now what we can control, because we can't control how it's being lost through the skin, we can control the production of urine. So the urine is now going to be extremely dilute. So there's a lot more water being removed and a fairly minimal amount of salts being removed, or ions. So this is the role of the kidneys in the fish, is to help regulate and produce different types of urine depending on the external conditions. And humans have the same issues. We have water that comes in through drinking, food, and metabolism. It's also dependent on the concentrations of sodium and potassium in the blood. And so in humans and all mammals, the excretory system, consisting of the kidneys, has the role of helping to balance out the body fluid concentrations by selectively creating either a more concentrated or a more dilute urine. So that's the beginning of this chapter. And we'll start exploring other roles of the kidney in production of urine, since that's how we're actually regulating osmosis. All right, thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.